All right, good evening. My name is Hannah Gunnell, and I am with the Ball State University Honors College Oral History Project. I am here today on Tuesday, March 26, 2019, on Ball State University's campus in Muncie, Indiana, to talk with Dr. John Emert about his experience here at Ball State University. I would like to start by asking you when and where you were born.
I was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, April 25th, 1961.
All right, and can you tell me a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. I'm the only child. My parents had me at the time late in life. As it turns out, my wife and I had our child late in life too. So it was a little different than some of my classmates growing up. Sometimes my parents got, they thought they were my grandparents instead of my parents. I grew up on a small cul-de-sac, about an acre of property. The backyard overlooked a large farm that had been abandoned, and it was a good childhood. I was loved. I enjoyed wandering in the backyard in the summertime. For a few summers, I picked blackberries and sold them on the streets of Knoxville.
What were your parents' names?
Dorothea and Howard. Although my dad rarely went by Howard, he went by Pete, or his close friends called him Boots. I never was sure exactly where Boots came from, but if someone called and asked for Boots, I knew it was a close friend.
What were your parents' careers?
My dad was a Royal Mail carrier for principally his entire career. He met my mom on the route. My mom grew up on a farm. She was the oldest of 4 or 5. She was actually the first person, she was part of the first class from the county to go to the public high school in town, in Sevierville. And she was part of the first graduating class that included county students. And she was valedictorian. And she had a scholarship to go to college. She had an aunt that she could have stayed with to go to college. Her dad wouldn't let her off the farm. So she did the only reasonable thing. She eloped with the mailman. So it's because of my dad's career that the family was formed and that I'm here.
Did your mom eventually go to college?
She did not. She worked several different ways along the way. She worked at a grocery store before she was married. She worked in an insurance office. She would have loved to have been a math teacher. She was very good at it. At the time, they told the parents, don't teach your kids English before they go to school, because we have this special way of teaching English. And she dutifully obeyed. So she taught me math instead. And so I have memories of being in the ironing room, had a little blackboard, and she would teach me math while she was ironing. So the first day of school, you have to remember there was no kindergarten at the time. So it was the first day of first grade. I'm going to this little county school that has about 20 students of each grade age. I'm walking down the hall. I find the first grade classroom all by myself. And I have this memory of sometime during that day going up to the teacher's desk and saying, I know my addition and subtraction, and I know about multiplication. When will we start division? So I was a bit of a terror from day one. But she grew that love of learning for me. And I think that showed in all that she did. She worked in the insurance office some. She picked beans in the summers to make money. She picked blackberries and I helped her so we could buy a piano. She cleaned houses. She worked in yards. She would do yard work for folks. She helped a friend run a shoe store for a couple of years. She was dedicated to making the marriage work because she couldn't go back. And so my mom and dad were committed, and they were the better for it.
What was the name of this county school you attended for first grade?
White School. The building still exists. It's no longer a school. It's now private property. But this tiny little 1st through 8th grade school, I attended through 6th grade. And then in 7th grade, there was a new middle school that was built to bring all the little county schools together. And it had all the new innovations, including open classrooms. So here was the phenomenon. 12 classrooms all trying to operate independently with no walls and all opening to a common library. I understand the PTA has now bricked up the walls for this purpose.
So you mentioned that your mom worked quite a few jobs and you were saving up to buy a piano. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me more about that story?
Yes. My dad's mom was a church organist, and she taught piano. They lived in another town. I would see them occasionally, but it wasn't that convenient. Music came naturally to me. I have a memory when I had a little toy organ when I was little, maybe 2 or 3. And I distinctly remember coming home from church and playing the hymns by ear on the toy organ. So I wanted to take piano lessons. My mom's hairdresser, how was this? My mom's hairdresser's daughter took piano lessons from a teacher at a tiny little college 5 miles down the road, known then as Johnson Bible College. It's now Johnson University. And so a teacher was identified, whose name I don't recall right now. That's all right. So my dad wasn't sure if it was good to, if it was worthwhile to invest. Money was tight. They had consulted, and the teacher had said, once he gets to 2nd grade, then he could take lessons. Then that's the time to start. The local furniture store sold pianos on 90 days, same as cash. And so you'd had 90 days to try it out and then maybe return it too. So it was like a contract. I had dutifully taken notes. My mom had too. She saw the potential there. And so I already told you about my first day of school. Apparently I started a conversation in that first day of school, and the upshot was I got tested, and after Christmas I was moved to 2nd grade. I still went back to 1st grade for reading because remember, didn't have any reading ahead of time. But by the end of that first year, I'd completed what I needed to for 1st grade and 2nd grade. And again, I remember noting to my mom and dad that, well, I'm in 2nd grade now. So I started piano lessons that January. And it was, it was a sacrifice. And the money from the Blackberries did go toward paying off the piano. I'm glad now that I helped to do that.
How much did that piano cost?
I have no idea.
Do you know how long it took to save for it?
Mm-mm. My mom and dad were good savers. We rarely bought anything on credit that we couldn't have paid for. That was the way we did things. So I know that they had found a way to manage, but we still needed to have that extra income to make up for the cost of the piano. My sense was it took a couple summers of buying Blackberries in addition to some frugalness to make it all come out.
When you attended high school, did you ever play piano for choirs?
Oh yeah.
Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. So I kept playing piano through grade school. Actually played a solo on a couple of the Christmas programs at the elementary school. Got to middle school. I was in the choir, and the choir director was very encouraging and encouraged me to play piano for the occasional piece, which was great. kept it up in high school. First 2 years, played for the choir, sang also, but played for the choir. And then my junior year of high school, the musical returned. The high school that I went to had done musicals for several years. They had a very strong choral program, but for whatever reason, they had suspended the musicals my first 2 years of high school. So my third year, the high school, the musical was going to return. We were doing Sound of Music. There were 2 pianists that would have been in line to play for the musical. And it was me and Amy Benson. And Amy wanted to be on stage, and I was happy to be in the pit. So Amy went on stage, and we were going to use an orchestra for the actual show, but we needed a rehearsal pianist to play for all the rehearsals. And so they handed me a full score. They said, just play as much as you can. And so I did. And that was one of those moving the rudder experiences. Because suddenly I knew half the school because they were involved in the musical somehow. And they knew me. And it wasn't that large of a school. It was about 1,300, 1,400. And I hadn't been bashful my first 2 years, but I had my circle and my friends. And suddenly, when I started working with the musicals, I blossomed. I blossomed socially, and I found that this was something I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the social part of it, and I absolutely loved the music part of it too. And after a few days, I figured out which instruments were transposing and which were not, so I could actually play the full score, and I had a lovely time. That was one of those moments where taking an opportunity opened the doors so nicely. So I continued piano lessons through then. I wanted to take organ lessons. I'd always had an interest in that, and it must have been about the same time that I picked up organ lessons. For a while I did piano lessons and organ lessons, then I shifted to organ only. And that opened up more doors too.
How so?
I was 15 and a half. I had played on occasion at the church that we were going to. Enjoyed it, but thought, I could do more. So there was a community newspaper that had buck ads. So for $1, you could put a 3-line ad in the paper. I thought, I'm going to put an ad in the paper. So I put an ad in the paper advertising, church organists for hire, and actually got 2 or 3 churches who called me. And one of them worked out nicely. Shiloh Baptist Church, which was out in the country in Sevier County. They were actually in need of a pianist and an organist. I couldn't even drive yet, so my mom drove me until I turned 16. And I played there for, let's see, how long did I play there? I played there for 2.5 years. And then that opened the door to doing some work at a local summer camp. And so I wound up, when the dust settled, I was the co-director, sort of the number 2 flunky for a small residential camp that's near Gatlinburg, that at the time was way out in the middle of nowhere. I'd never gone to camp. I was allergic to everything, growing up, so it wasn't even on my radar. And suddenly here I am, offering some leadership in a summer camp, and it was a great experience. It taught me the patience of Job. Taught me to realize, in a real personal way, how fortunate I really was. It's about 60 kids each week. The first year I worked there for 4 summers. The first summer that I worked there, I remember noting that of the staff, less than half had indoor plumbing. Substantial number of the kids were at camp because they wanted a hot meal. And there were some who were paying their way But if we had an empty bed coming up on a week, we would always find a way to fill it, and we would find a way to pay the bills. And that was a great experience for me, especially growing up as an only child in a neighborhood that didn't have other kids. It brought out another piece of me that I think makes me who I am today, because I realized what a potential there is in people, and how sometimes it's just a matter of looking beyond the surface and realizing what can really be done if we put the right people in the right place with the right tools.
You mentioned something I would like to go back to. You said that you were allergic to everything growing up.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, poison ivy, poison oak, dogs, cats, horses, probably grass, I'm not sure. So even though I like being outside, I was always congested and never had a pet. Still enjoyed being outside. So it just made it work.
Do you still have these allergies?
Oh yeah, they morph a little bit. So I still know when I'm within range of a long-haired cat. I'm still sensitive to some things, but you just make do.
Do you ever have issues with that here on campus?
No. Thanks to Allegra.
I also, in my research, found something interesting from your childhood I want to touch on.
Sure.
So I was reading a paper that a student did over your experience in the 1960s, and they said in this paper that you used to watch the news with your parents in the evening, and you were listening to the Vietnam War death toll. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Oh yeah. Walter Cronkite, every night there would be a time where the number of Americans who died, the number of South Vietnamese who died, the number of North Vietnamese who died, and the number of Soviets who died were reported. It was reported sort of like the stock market report, but it was always reported. And it was real. And I remember sitting on the sofa. This was a family thing. I would sit down to watch the news. I remember thinking, what are we really doing here? You know, where is the end game? Where is the logic here? And now I think back on those days, and I still have those feelings. You know, this was from my perspective, this was a chess game that we might not have even been trying to win. And my mom had a boyfriend in high school who didn't come back from that war. Not Vietnam, but the war at that time. And war's necessary, but there needs to be some logic. There needs to be a purpose. And it wasn't clear to me growing up what that purpose really was.
Okay. In the interest of time, we need to
move
on.
Along.
So I see that you attended the University of Tennessee.
I did, in fact.
I'm not really sure how to phrase this question, but you grew up with mathematics and music and decided to pursue that in college. Mm-hmm. So I guess why did you decide to pursue that? Yeah,
in high school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I took the military aptitude tests. I had some friends who were going that route. I thought about engineering. I thought about accounting. I thought about many things. The I believe I changed my mind enough during the summer that UT finally sent me a blank form and just said, "Tell us what you're going to major in when you get there." And when I got there, I chose music. My plan was to major in music and minor in math. I'd really enjoyed my organ lessons. I enjoyed the challenge of those high school productions. I knew the organ teacher at UT, and I liked what he could bring out in me. So my decision was major in music, minor in math. I even thought about a minor in physics for one term and realized that there were people who were much more gifted in physics than I, but I still enjoyed my physics year. I fell in love with the music. I really did. I fell in love with the puzzles, with the finding a rhythm, an understanding in the mix. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed the challenge of music theory. I picked up some extra courses because I was in college, and I was fortunate that Tennessee did not charge an overload fee. We were on quarters, so it's a little different, but I would routinely take 22, maybe 23 hours in a term because there were things I wanted to do. And I was in college because it was a privilege. It was an opportunity. So I took extra courses in music. I took some extra music composition courses that did me well. I actually worked as a contract composer for a few years for a publishing house. I took some extra music history and musicology courses because they were interesting. At the same time, I took some extra math courses because I enjoyed that too. Really got to know my math teachers quite well. And for a school as large as Tennessee, that initial effort to get to know my teacher paid off so well. I helped one of my math teachers buy a piano. My Calc 1 teacher was a practicing trumpeter. Another one of my math teachers was a Juilliard-trained pianist. And there were others. And so what I found in the math department was people who saw me for more than a student, saw me as a person. And the same was true in music. And so the two complemented each other quite nicely. I kept taking math courses because I enjoyed them. So I wound up with a double major in 4 years with some extra courses too. Actually, when the dust settled, I think I had 6 or 9 credits of graduate math courses because, well, my friends were taking it, so I should too. And I was starting to see some of the challenge. For the last 3 years of undergraduate and what turned out to be my first year of grad school, I also played for a traveling musical group, much akin to the University Singers here. It was started by Don Newen, the same guy who started the Singers here. He went to Tennessee. His last 2 years at Tennessee were my first 2 years at Tennessee. And so I got to work underneath him with UT Singers. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. And frankly, it was a nice bonus that it came with a full scholarship too, which gave me the time to love it also. And so that in itself opened so many extra doors. But then it was graduation. And I had every intention of being a musician, applied for a few jobs, had a couple of full-time leads. Nothing was quite perfect though. It just wasn't right for me. And as fortune would have it, the math department had managed to fail too many grad students that year. And they needed warm bodies to teach calculus. And so they made me the offer I couldn't refuse. They said, we'll give you an assistantship for 2 years. Get your master's degree. And then they made an extra offer, which never happens, should never have happened. They said that I could share it the first year with music. So my first year, I did the UT Singers again and taught calculus as a grad student. And I loved it. And what I discovered was that same excitement, that same giddiness that comes from being in the pit or being in a performance group. I could get that same excitement. I could have that same challenge to communicate with others in front of a classroom. And as fate would have it, I wound up doing all three of my degrees at Tennessee then. So I did my master's in mathematics. By the time I was done with my master's, I had passed the prelims to the doctoral program. I actually thought about going somewhere else, but instead I changed areas, and it was a perfect decision. It was exactly what I needed to be doing. So that's the long version of how the music even propelled me through my math.
Well, it kind of shows how you started teaching as well, correct?
Absolutely.
So when did you decide that you wanted to teach full-time?
That was during grad school. And again, mathematics, the math sciences department, again, saw me for more than a student. So they put me in places. They gave me places that I could grow and test myself. 1 year they assigned me to rewrite the curriculum for one of the service courses. And so I discovered that I enjoyed crafting, of anticipating how different people might view a topic, of sort of being in the background and being ready for the student who sees it one way or the student sees it another way. For at least a year or two, I was teaching large lectures, and so I would run a class of 150 or 200, and I would have undergraduates who would do breakout sessions. So they gave me the opportunity to discover if I enjoyed it or not, and I did. Tennessee switched from quarters to semesters while I was a grad student, and amongst the anomalies that showed up in that change, there was the need for a 1 credit, once a week, linear algebra course for engineers who didn't have time to take linear algebra. So it was just teach on the moves, just get it done. And they asked me to do it. Actually, they told me to do it. So I thought, how do I do this course? This is very different than, just standing up there and demonstrating. I have to find a different approach to this. And so that was the first time that I realized I've got to do some pretty serious planning, because I can't take the risk that I make a typo when I'm doing it live. So that was the first course, probably the only course, that I completely scripted the entire course. And so when I walked in, I handed the students a copy of my notes, and we marched through the notes every day, because it was about telling the story, not demonstrating it. It sort of took me to a different place. But I enjoyed it. I always enjoyed it. Even when it was difficult, I enjoyed it. 1 year they gave me the task, it was the same part of the conversion, because we had moved to semesters. There was a chance that my engineering majors again, if they got stuck in the first semester, they would be a whole semester behind, not just a quarter behind, and there was some tracking issues. And so they decided that they needed to offer a invitation-only kind of remedial experience. And so it was a privilege to be invited to my room. And so I showed up, the selected ones showed up. If they didn't show up, their space was given to someone else. And my job was to survey the crowd of about 20, and in that hour, group them into small groups, so that by the end of that hour, each of them had their own problem solved for whatever their issue was, no matter what the group was. So it was the classroom with blackboards on all 4 sides, small group learning, me sort of floating from group to group. I enjoyed that. That was another piece of the puzzle that taught me that this was something this was a challenge I really enjoyed.
Did you ever teach music courses?
Not as a grad student. I taught a little bit of private piano to friends, but nothing major.
So how did you get from University of Tennessee to Ball State?
So here's the history lesson. I graduated in 1989. I was interviewing in January that year, just before the Reagan recession, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification, Tiananmen Square. I was the last class that came out where the schools were literally chasing the applicants down the hallways at the conference. I said no to interviews. Don't ever say no to interviews. You're not supposed to do this, but I did. I said no to an offer, not having another offer in hand. You shouldn't do that either. But I found myself with a phenomenal opportunity. My top schools, my top choices, all made me offers within a day of each other. Ball State was one of those. And I chose Ball State because of all the schools I interviewed, I saw in this place the potential for growth. I saw the potential for growth in the school, and I also saw the potential of growth for me being at this school. And I tell you, it's been realized even more than I could possibly have imagined at the time. I had no idea I would be here 30 years later. I do remember during part of the new employee process, being handed my options for retirement benefits and thinking, oh my goodness, what in the world shall I do now? Wasn't even on the radar. And yet, this is the place that I've grown. It's the place where I met my wife. It's where we're raising our child. This is home. And the university is so much more than it was 30 years ago also.
I have like 3 questions in my head and I can't decide which one I want to ask first. Okay, let's start with, you mentioned that you saw the potential for growth. How have you grown?
I had lots of good experiences as a grad student. Had lots of good experiences as a musician in Knoxville. But I was still green. It took me a couple of years to let go of being a grad student, of not feeling like I had to get the next job done immediately, of letting go. That was the first point of growth. Growing to realize, as all pre-tenure folk should learn, that one needs to move beyond your graduate work. The advice that I give to others and that I gave to myself was cast broadly and celebrate the fish that you catch. I have a filing cabinet in the basement of the Honors House filled with research projects that will never get done. Many of them are flawed and failed and couldn't possibly get done. But I was fortunate because as I casted, I found projects that spoke to me, that spoke to others. I discovered early on that I thrived on collaboration. I thrived on finding applications of, again, connecting to other areas. One of my early projects, Klaus Unst and I worked for at least 5-6 years on it. Our major professors in grad school knew each other. So we were introduced at a conference. And we worked off and on, mostly on, trying to generalize a particular result in mathematics that was applicable to DNA replication. It had to do with some nodding theory. And several times we thought we were onto something. We pushed the rubric, and then we were able to find the flaw. So we'd back up and we tried again. And we finally figured it out. And our original goal was to try to move from the simple case that everyone understood, which was the n equals 2 case, to an n equals 3 case. But when we finally figured it out, we realized that we had the tool to move us not only from 2 to 3, but from 2 to any number. So our persistence paid off. It's another piece of the puzzle of how to understand and characterize DNA replication. I don't understand the science of it, but I have a little piece of how to describe it, how to characterize it, how to describe it geometrically. And that's what Klaus and I worked on. And I had several of those kind of experiences. That's one way where I've moved on. I was fortunate that I was given some leadership assignments early on. I was the first undergraduate coordinator for the math department. So this was the point of confluence for the math ed, the math, the actual science, the statistics, the applied math, where all those, at that time, fairly disparate programs sort of all merged into one. And looking back on it, part of my job then was to try to find ways to encourage those different parts of the department to talk to one another, to realize how their work could coordinate. So one of the things I did during that time as a leadership role was to guide us to the point where we could identify 8 courses that would run once every 2 years that could serve one or more of those sub areas. And by building a schedule, by making a commitment to this routine, we could all benefit. Because that way we knew that that course that a small population would need would come up in the rotation. And it took some conversation, it took some crafting. But that was part of how I grew. I learned how to be a leader, to guide, while still encouraging conversation, encouraging all the players to be part of the puzzle.
You keep using the motif piece of the puzzle. So my next question is, how did the Honors College play into that puzzle?
The first colloquium that I taught, I believe I taught my second year I was here. I don't recall how I learned about the Honors College. I think it was through a student who told me about it. But I discovered the Honors College and the colloquia, and realized that no one in mathematics was participating. And so I remember meeting with Arno Wittig and Joanne Edmonds and making my proposal. And they took the risk. So my first colloquium used Douglas Hofstadter's book, Gödel, Escher, Bach, which is really a book about artificial intelligence, but on another level, it looks at common themes, common threads between the music of J.S. Bach, the art of M.C. Escher, and the work of Gödel, who's a logician who proved, 20th century logician, who proved things like there's a space between things that are true and things that are false. There are things that are true but can't be proven to be true. There are things that are false that can't be proven to be false. There's a gray area in there. And I took it at that level. I liked the book. As it turned out, I read that book when I was working at summer camp the summer before I started UT. And always enjoyed it. Found it to be challenging, found it to be the kind of book that you'd get something more out of it every time you read it. I also knew that Douglas Hofstadter was at IU. And it didn't happen the first time, but the second time I taught it, made arrangements for him to be part of the class also. That was my first honors colloque, and that was a piece of the puzzle. That was my chance to branch out a little bit again. And as you might anticipate, the colloquium attracted a few mathematicians, a few philosophy majors, some art majors, and the random crowd also. It was a great conversation. I enjoyed it very much. Offered it a second time. Somewhere in the mix, I did a summer course also. There was an early start program that Honors College ran at the time that would bring high school students in. And so I offered a variation, not that course, but I think it had something to do about geometry and puzzles. And I remember utilizing the art museum for that. Because my whole point was to opened up the eyes to the way that mathematics is part of a bigger puzzle. That it's a piece. It's not an island, but it's part of a rich tapestry that all fits together.
How many times did you teach this course total?
Oh my goodness.
Or what years did you teach it from, if that's easier?
I think I taught it twice, and then I moved on. I've taught quite a few colloques. I rarely repeat them because I have so many that I want to do, and I think I probably did it twice, maybe 3 times. I'm not sure.
Have you ever taught more than one at a time? Like different colloques at a time?
No, I haven't.
Why not?
Might have been in part because when I was in mathematics, I could sneak away. I could change up my mix so I could do one honors class. I'm not sure I ever asked to do 2. I'm not sure at the time I would have been able to balance it along with everything else I wanted to do. The year I taught the colloque for the first time, I was teaching that and a graduate course. And so it was an interesting mix, even as it was.
Did you ever teach any music courses here?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Why not?
I don't have a good graduate degree in music. I have been on some music doctoral committees, though, and that's been fun. The way the doctoral committee structure is laid out here, there needs to be someone from outside the area to serve on the committee. And since I'm not affiliated formally with the School of Music, I can serve that role. But I can still contribute to the conversation. There was one unfortunate committee where when the student was doing the oral defense, I knew the answers and that student did not, and she had been studying and preparing for it, and I'm thinking, oh, you poor unfortunate, don't you know Copeland when you see it? But I was kind and I kept my mouth shut. But I have been involved in music in ways like that.
Have you ever introduced any music courses, even though you couldn't teach them, have you ever introduced any music courses into the Honors College?
I have encouraged others, which is sort of part of my role now, is to help, especially when I was associate dean and a little bit even now, of growing those new opportunities. So Galit's course is a great example. Music of the Holocaust. My goal there, my goal there was to help her find a way to move the course out of the classroom, and she took my idea and ran with it and grew it into something that's really quite lovely. So I have those opportunities. I've had a little bit of collaboration with a couple of music faculty, composition folks, but nothing's come out of it yet. But it might. You never know.
I would like to transition into talking about your experience with University Senate.
Oh my goodness.
Okay.
Oh, you're going for all of the dark, dim past.
Is that not a topic
No,
you're
it's
okay
fine.
with
No,
talking
I'm
about?
perfectly fine talking about it.
Okay.
I was chair of Senate for a year.
Okay, so I saw, if my research is correct, I saw you joined in 1995.
That's correct.
Okay, why did you join? How did that come about?
I believe at the time I was elected by my department. I was either elected by my department or by my college, and I was willing to step forward. I had been involved in the undergraduate education committee, and I had been a member of that committee and chaired that committee for a couple of years. This is the committee that vets undergraduate programs and undergraduate program changes. I think it's fair to say I put my name forward for University Senate because there was work to be done and I was willing to take it on. We needed senators who were willing to think deeply, not merely rubber stamp. And so it wasn't that I was running against anyone, but I was certainly willing to take my turn. And so that's why I put my name forward when the opportunity arose. So I was a member for a few years, I think I was secretary one of the years, and then I became president of the Senate for a year. And as part of that, I because of that election, I was on the search committee for president that brought President Gore to campus in the end.
Can you talk about that experience a little bit?
It was a great opportunity. I'm proud of the work that we did. It helped affirm what I probably already knew, that administration is a hard job. And I had actually worked with President Worthen on a project. We presented jointly at a national meeting, he and I. So I had through John Worthen, I had a little glimpse of what that office entailed. Through the search process to find the president that wound up being President Gore, it educated me a bit as to how complex this job really is and how important this job really is. And we were a good committee. We worked hard. We listened to one another. We struggled with hard decisions. And while we were the search committee, we were not the selection committee. I have to say I was very pleased with the results that the Board of Trustees made based on our work.
I also discovered that you were on the honors subcommittee.
Yes, I was.
What did that look like? What did you do as part of that committee?
We were, in theory, an advisory committee to the Dean of the Honors College. In truth, we didn't do very much. I remember one year we met and elected the president, and then we met the next year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Why do you think you were not utilized as much as you could have been?
I don't know. That was in a Senate structure that had many more committees. It was a structure that recruited quite broadly to fill the ranks, as opposed to the current structure, which purposes a single person in 3 or 4 or 5 committees. This was the antithesis. This was bringing in as many players as possible. Part of the challenge might have been that we were bringing in people who were either naive to what the committee should be doing or were simply seeking a line on the vita. So I don't think the blame goes anywhere in particular. It was probably part of a larger system that was overpopulated with committees.
Is this committee still in existence?
No,
Do you know?
No, I think we dissolved ourselves one year.
Do you know what year that was?
I have no idea.
All right. At this point in the timeline, I have that you married your wife in 2001. Would you
Yes.
like to talk about that a little bit?
It was lovely. She noticed me. At the time, I was playing for one of the services at our church. She was attending. She was a faculty member. I was playing on Sundays. I was oblivious. And then one Sunday, the pastor that day made some off-the-wall comment that I was a mathematician, and she picked up on it. So she called a friend of hers who was in math and said, "Tell me about this Emert guy." And my colleague in math apparently put in a good word for me. So she emailed me and said, saw you at church, would you like to go out for dinner? What she didn't realize was I was in DC on a conference, and I didn't get the email. So she had emailed, no reply. So she went back to my colleague in math and said, why isn't he answering? And so my colleague in math said, he's in DC, try again. So she tried again. And by then I had found it. And so I replied and proposed that we have a date at a restaurant in the village, which no longer exists, and for good reason. Pretty bad. And so you got to remember, I was oblivious. So I did the only reasonable thing. I showed up really, really early with a table with my back to the wall so that she could find me, because I couldn't have picked her out of the crowd. And there was no crowd either, because that restaurant needed to die. So, so she came early, but I came earlier. So it started out fine. We ordered the special. Then we proceeded to wait, I think, 45 minutes. About time 30, they brought these strange looking green drinks for us that, no thank you. Something edible came at mark 45, which we sort of ate. And then I had tickets for Guys and Dolls at University Theater. And, well, we were going to miss most of the first half, but we walked over anyway. And my seats were on the aisle. And so I knew where they were. We sneaked in. 10 minutes later, the lights came up. And several people said, "Hi, John." "Hi, Elizabeth." So we were found out within 10 minutes of joining. As Elizabeth puts it, she had no clue what was going on in the musical. But we had a lovely evening. And then we went for coffee somewhere afterward. And then I said the right thing. I said, "What are we doing tomorrow?" That was Friday night. I had picked up that she has a research interest in Amish literature and culture. And I knew about Bern. And so Saturday morning, I took her to Bern, which is a Amish community near Portland, where they still speak High German. And our date continued. It's been wonderful. We got married 3 days after my 40th birthday. And I don't think my student was trying to be funny when my actuarial student major pointed out that I was beating the odds. Because a single guy aged 40, the chances of that person ever getting married is pretty low. But I did. This was complicated by the fact that I proposed to her 2 or 3 months after she had accepted a job at Indiana State. So she told me that she'd accepted at the Scramble Light in March. She was back in town end of June for a conference. She was at the Alumni Center. I was to pick her up and we were going to go out and have supper. And then she was going to go back to the evening session at the conference. Well, I picked her up and I said, we need to go by the house first. And once I sat down at the piano and sang to her a song that I'd written to propose, she wasn't hungry anymore. So went and told the neighbor. And then we went and told my friend in math, who put us together. And then she went back to work. And as she tells the story, a couple of them said, "Well, how was supper?" And she said, "We didn't eat, but I got this." 9 months later, we were married. And then 3 years later, on my wife's 40th birthday, we discovered that she was pregnant. And that's where Jacob came from. So we lived apart for 4 years. Elizabeth made the decision, as we knew that Jacob was going to be born, to give up her chairship at Indiana State. And that was a lovely gift. We had talked about other options. There was one school that was already convinced that I was going to go there and be chair. They just forgot to tell me. They thought they had solved the problem for us. But as it turned out, Elizabeth decided to be full-time mom. And it's been wonderful. So we did it all in the wrong order. But it's worked out for us.
Is she still a full-time mom?
She sure is. She volunteers. She occasionally subs in the Muncie schools. She occasionally helps out at Camp Adventure, which is a outdoor training camp that the city schools run. And she's occasionally been on the board. She does the occasional grant writing. But she would characterize herself as a full-time mom. That's a wonderful gift for Jacob and for me.
What is your son like?
He looks a lot like me. He has a heart. He has a heart of compassion. He enjoys music, plays trumpet, took several years of piano. He's a wicked good tennis player. But he doesn't play with a vengeance. He plays with determination. He was the only freshman on the varsity team this year. He earned it. But he also decided that he wanted to join the unified track team at Muncie Central. And as I understand it, this is a team that is half special needs children and half friends of special needs children. And Jacob loves it. And he's right in there with everybody else.
Is he also a mathematician?
Oh yeah. He was asking good questions early on also. He's taking Algebra 2 as a freshman and asking good questions. And occasionally I will say, not now. Let's wait on that question just a little bit. He also enjoys science. Patty Lang, chemist, my associate dean for a couple of years, really brought out some of the scientific magic for him. He enjoys his science classes. But I can see him being a forensic chemist. It's all about the puzzle again. It's about taking the ill-posed problem and twisting it around and making something fun of it. And he's got that bug too, in his own way.
Did you also teach him math before English?
No, we did both because Elizabeth is a reading specialist.
Okay.
So he had books read to him before he was born. And in the car, we would play the pattern games some. But it wasn't intentional. It was because it was just part of who he was, part of who we are.
Do you ever show him old Cardinal Quest problems that were written in the Daily News?
No, I do not. That was Jay Bogga and I. That was fun. That was another one of those attempts to allow mathematics to not be so isolated. In a sense, that's a variation of what I aim to do as Honors College Dean too. To let us not be the best kept secret on campus, in our community, in our peer group of other honors programs and colleges. Cardinal Quest was a fun little project. I remember Jay and I seeing this call for environmental awareness initiatives, and we thought there are lots of cool questions here. And we devised the first few immediately. My goodness, did that persist for a whole year?
That was from 93 to 94, I believe.
Yeah, maybe 2 years.
Let me see. 93, 94. Yeah.
We had to convince the newspaper that this was reasonable too. That wasn't hard, but so we essentially got a byline in the paper, and some weeks we got lots of submissions. I don't believe we ever had a week where we had no submissions, but it fueled conversation, and it was a cool way to look at questions that were timely, seen through the lens of mathematics.
Why did it stop?
We moved on. I think we all moved on. We moved on as a campus. It was a lovely initiative. I'm not sure we asked for funding for a re-op. In some sense, we had completed our task. We're moving on.
So you've touched on this a little bit, so I'm going to ask you up front, what is your goal as Dean of the Honors College?
My goal is to empower all students who seek to be active in their learning, in their growth. My goal is to provide them the resources to lay it out on the buffet so that the students can make the most of themselves. There's a lot of good that's happening. When I first stepped in as interim, I guess it's been 4 years now, I saw some additional potential that could be had. We could be reaching more students through undergraduate fellowships. That was a change I made within the first month or so. What I saw, what I still see in our student population are students who have such potential, and the ones who are willing to take a risk, to push themselves a little bit. I want to be with them. I want them to be able to be equipped to take those risks. I want them to experience the occasional tripping. I want them to know that not every problem has an immediate and obvious solution. I want them to be equipped to be able to get through those rough times and push themselves. I want them to have the experiences akin to what I had, where an opportunity can open doors. Putting that buck ad in the paper led me to working in summer camp for 4 years, which led me to working with a community choir in Gatlinburg through the rec department for 6.5 years. A friendship connected me with Don Newen, which opened up the singers, which opened up my work as a music composer, and opened up an opportunity that led to being a full-time pianist for 6 months at the World's Fair in '82. If we only meet standard, if we only do what the rubric tells us to do, if we only do what it takes to get the degree, or to pass the course, or to get that next step, we're going to miss so much. And for some people, moving to that next step is what they need to do. They need to take it They need to take it cautiously, but not everyone. And for the people who look beyond their major, for the people who see themselves as more than their major, or more than their hometown, or more than what their uncle thinks they ought to do as a profession. Those are the people that I can impact, because they're the ones who are already chomping at the bit a little bit. They're the ones who struggle to decide what the next step is. And I get it. I was there too. But at the end of the day, those are the people who are going to push us forward as a society. Those are the people who are going to look for the novel approaches. Those are going to be the people who will make the discoveries and the artifacts. We're going to find the novel approaches to health care. They're the ones who are going to ask the off-the-wall questions that make all the difference. They're the ones who are going to be with Jacob, this next generation. And my goal is to make sure that we can all equip those people who want to take the risk. That's my goal in the Honors College.
Are there any specific students where you really felt that you hit this goal?
Oh, yeah.
Can you give me an example?
There are a couple obvious ones of recent. I'll name them. Then I want to think about another one too. Hannah Floor is my first Rural Innovation Scholarship recipient. She's already doing great things. She's working on a project looking at novel treatment for newborns who are suffering from opioid withdrawal. In the words of her professor, who's her mentor for this project, she's doing work that no one else is doing. So regardless of her findings, she's making a difference. I think of Jonathan Isbell, who's a graduate student now, nutrition. If I'm not mistaken, first generation college student. Small town. As a freshman, he was pretty laser focused on get the nutrition degree, move it along. But then he discovered that an honors fellowship could help him do something more. And so as a sophomore, he went after research on the health benefits of certain ethnic spices and foods. It was a nice mixing of his comfort, of his nutrition, with something that pushed him a little bit. Because he was looking at foods that probably were not on his table growing up. But he did more than look at the foods. He looked at the people. He did some interviews. He went to some homes. He discovered there was a passion there. And so he did a second fellowship. He did a third on different topics. But he realized how much more there was out there. It's sort of like caving, you know? He discovered how rich that environment could possibly be if we kept pushing a little more. And he was a finalist for Fulbright last year for the gastronomy Fulbright in Italy. And he's in the running again this year. And I hope to goodness he gets it. Several of our undergraduate fellowship recipients have received Fulbrights and similar opportunities, in part because they hit the ground running. And I know that opening that door for a fellowship, opening that door for that humanities course that didn't seem to have anything to do with the major, because it didn't. Opening that door to a global studies course opened up the eyes and helped the students realize that there was so much more. There was so much more than the routine. There was so much more than merely jumping through the hoops. And for Jonathan, for Hannah, for many, many students, let's be realists now. We've always done that. I mean, through the whole 60 years, we've got the success stories. We've got the folks who grew because of in part because of what they got through the Honors College. I think the key to our further growth, though, is to help our current students realize that potential and that value and that impact as early as possible. And that's part of my goal, is to shorten that timeline a bit, so that we don't ask 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what's the impact? But we can see short-term impact also.
So I need to backtrack a little bit.
Okay.
How did you get from being chair of the math department to associate dean of the Honors College?
Well, you see, Elizabeth and I were sitting reading the paper one Sunday, and I knew that Joanne Edmonds was going to be retiring sometime soon. She was associate dean for years and years and years, but I didn't know when. And so it came as a bit of a surprise when I opened up the Star Press on Sunday, and I said, "Look, Elizabeth, there's an ad in the paper." And so that's how I found out about it. There was also a national ad. As I know now, there was a national search. Elizabeth and I thought, this is something that I should apply for. And I was midterm as chair. As it turned out, I left after 3 years of a 5-year term. But it was one of those opportunities that would come up so rarely that I thought, this is something I should apply for. Maybe it's the right next step. So I applied. I remember the interview with Dean Rule. I felt good about it. Apparently he felt good about it too. And so the offer was made and I accepted. Very happy that I read the paper that day. I remember when I was finishing up my doctorate, the church that I was organist at the time in Knoxville was going through a staff restructuring. They offered me a full-time job. And I could have paired that with the music composition work that I was doing for the publisher and added a couple extra little things, and it could have been a good job. But as I said to that church, thank you very much, but I just finished my doctorate in math. I'd like to give it a whirl. Get back with me in 20 years. Well, I was off by a year, because after 19 years, I left math and started a new career.
How do you think this fit into the puzzle?
Oh, it brought me full circle. Honors College gives me the opportunity to interact with all disciplines. It allows me to grow as a person, not as a mathematician, but as a person. And I absolutely love the aspects of my job that empower students. And that's much of what I do. When I meet with a student who's struggling to find that senior thesis topic, those are rich moments because it gives me a chance to chat with a student about what's important to them and why they chose the majors they did and why they didn't choose that other major and why they're still involved, in the art museum even though they're a accounting major. Or why are you on the square dancing team, if you're a German major. And experience helps. But those are rich conversations because if I do my job well, then by the end of that half hour or so, I've led the student to find themselves, to find that element that gets them a little giddy. And I can do it, I'm equipped because I've done that myself. I see myself as more than a mathematician or a musician. I'm a person. And that's a key to our success as a college, is to see each other as people, to respect the whole person, including yourself, to be willing to be honest, to realize that there's more than the next step. There's a big picture there. And it's been good for me. It gives me a chance to interact with the arts folks, with the humanities folks, with the social scientists, with all folks.
I found a Daily News article that suggested that when you became Associate Dean of the Honors College, you were bringing a mathematical look to the Honors College.
Oh my goodness, I was a radical.
Would you explain a little bit?
I was a radical when I offered the first colloquium on as a mathematician. Honors College historically had grown out of history and English. In fact, the humanities sequence were originally English classes when they were first designed 60 years ago or 50 years ago. At least on the surface, the fact that we are hiring a mathematician to join this liberal arts humanities crowd was rather radical. I'm glad Jim took the risk. And I think he figured it out too, that I'm not a mathematician. I'm John. And it's as important for me to look beyond the major as it is for my colleagues in math to look beyond their silos, and for all of our faculty to look beyond our silos. I think that's part of why partnering with people outside of math, working on applications in my research, was important, because it was an important part of who I am. And I did some research purely inside the discipline too. What I really enjoyed, what I really got excited about, were those projects that stretched me. And so, while I'm confident there was some angst and a little bit of unknown when the mathematician has entered the Honors College, I think it's worked out pretty well for me and for the college both.
I had a question and then forgot what it was. So you became Associate Dean of the Honors College in 2008, correct? Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from the Carmichael to the Honors House?
Oh, yes. Yes, I came July 1. My boxes were all stacked in my office because, of course, we're going to be moving in a few months. Why unpack the boxes? So I had my critical need boxes that I did unpack, but I essentially worked out of boxes because, well, we're going to move in February, so why unpack just to pack again? And then February became April, and April became May, and May became June, and we were just drifting and drifting and drifting and drifting. And then it was the 1st of August, and I remember the week because it was the state fair. And it was a Friday, and I had had enough. And so I did the only reasonable thing. I unplugged my phone. I unplugged my computer, which was a laptop. I turned in my key, and I announced to the staff that I was moving to the honors house. And so I took my box, and I took my laptop, and I took my phone, and I walked into the honors house and sat down in my office, which had no furniture, no internet. I think we had electricity running. I aimed my laptop at Emmons Auditorium to get the signal, and announced that we were now open for business. I had no furniture, so I had a fold-up table and a folding chair, but I was done with living in boxes. I was ready to move in. And the rest of the staff followed me within the week or so. Carmichael was a lovely year. We had a garden level office. My first apartment, or my apartment when I first moved to Muncie, was also garden level. You know what that means. Basement. So windows at the top of the wall. Dank. A little damp sometimes. Half the campus had no clue where Carmichael was. The other half didn't want to venture that far. And then we found ourselves in the Edmond, Virginia Ball Honors House. What a gift. What a gift. We've moved to the center of campus, both literally and figuratively. And that move was an important step to our recognition, to our involvement as an active part of the campus community. And I was ready to move.
Are you still in the same office you were in when you moved?
No, I actually, I'm now back in the rear office. The front office is the associate dean office, and the rear office is the dean's office. So, when Dean Ribble became ill, there was a period of about 10 months where Dean Ribble would be back in a week or so. And so Coralie and I tried our best to take care of the crisis moments because Jim would be back in a week. And he made a valiant effort, but he didn't. So for those first 10 months, I'm in my office. Between Coralie and I, we're trying to do the job of 3 people. And then it came early August, and I remember Bob Morris called me into the provost office. He was acting provost, and saying, "It's time it's time to call you the acting dean." And I said yes. And I knew what my first job was. Within 10 minutes, I was on the phone with Patty Lang, who was on vacation in Florida. And I told her that I'd been named acting dean. And I told her I was calling her because I needed an associate dean. And she didn't have to say yes immediately. She could wait till she got back. And then she could say yes. And she laughed. And she said yes. Patty and I had worked. We had never actually worked together on a project, but we had tag teamed several times. She followed me as the local leader for the Lewis Stokes Initiative many years before. We had both been chairs. We probably had been on a committee or two together. I'm really not sure, but I knew her well. She knew me. And so between the day I called her and the day she showed up, which was about August 18th, I need to get out of the office. And so we pushed Jim's stuff, actually sort of cleared his desk a little bit. I just moved onto the desktop. His stuff was still in the shelves. My stuff was still in Patty's office, but we made the move. And then 2 years later, when I'm named dean, that's when or I guess it was a year later, we named dean because Patty was my associate dean for 2 years. She was my associate dean for my first year as dean. We had a search. And by the end of that year, the associate dean office was cleared out so that Amy Livingstone could join us, and I was moved in for real. So it was a lot of need it now kind of elements on top of everything else that was going on.
What was that like emotionally, having to clear some of...
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. Some of the stuff we passed on to Connie. We invited her to go through some of the other stuff. Jim made a real difference. He propelled us well through his years. I was not on the search committee that hired Jim. I was on the search committee that hired Bruce Meyer. So I had a little glimpse of what was being sought then. But I knew. I'd seen the Honors College pre-Jim and his work to transform us to be a national model was extraordinary. And my goal is to take it from where he left it and keep us moving forward.
What year did you become dean?
July 1, 2017.
How did Jim impact you personally?
He gave me room to grow. He was a sounding board for me. I was a sounding board for him. We were a good tag team. We saw things differently. But frankly, I think that's what you want in a colleague. You want someone who compliments you. And Jim saw that potential in me. He brought it out. He introduced me to what was going on at the national level with NCHC. He encouraged me to be active in the national work. That's a good thing. I'm a certified program reviewer for NCHC, in part because Jim encouraged me to go after that. Did my first program review a couple months ago. He encouraged me to go after further training in development and fundraising. And I finished my certificate in fundraising management at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy last year. So not only was he a good colleague and a good sounding board, he challenged me to continue to grow.
We have about a half hour remaining, so for the sake of time, we are going to move on to another topic. I believe it was 2013 when the Ball State Honors College was able to hire its own faculty for the first time. Can you talk about the process of how that came to be?
Well, there were two lines in history that had been filled with the understanding that they would be lines that the Honors College would be able to utilize to teach, two contract lines. One hire was made 15 years ago, the other one about 10 years ago. I believe that for both of those, the Honors College was involved in the hiring process. Both of them occurred just as I was coming in, though. So I don't believe I was involved in hiring Jason, and Tim Berg would have been the first hire from 15 years ago. The conversion of the lines to report to the Honors College was something that was important. It was important because it's an attribute of a fully developed honors college from the national standards. But there's a reason why it's on that short list of things that a fully developed honors college should do. We need, as a college, it's important that we have a core that we can rely on, that we can vet, that we can utilize as a sounding board, as a faculty. We need the practical protection that if our handshake agreement with a department fades away, as will happen every once in a while, we cannot be up a creek. We've got classes we need to be able to teach them. So there's that practical piece. But there's also the care and maintenance of courses piece too. And a department has courses that thrive because the faculty nurture them. And so we needed faculty to nurture our courses. It was a political challenge, but at the end of the day, we were successful. I was not privy to all the details. I knew enough to know it had been a challenge, but I knew that Jim was fighting hard for it. At the end of the day, we received 4 lines. We received the 2 lines in history. There was a line from English where the faculty member had been teaching full-time in honors and was almost a de facto line. And there was a 4th line that did reside in modern languages and classics, but it was a decentralized line. So the person that was holding the line was actually not teaching in honors, but there was a bit of a barter that was happening. Fast forwarding a few years, that line became free and moved to honors. But Jim chose not to fill it. And I know a couple reasons why Jim made that decision. But when I stepped in as interim, that was another piece that I felt like needed to be addressed. We were in a precarious situation. We had lost some more affiliates, what I call affiliate faculty, people who are in other units who were teaching for us. We were at a risk of not being able to support our own courses. And so one of the moves that I made was the decision to fill that 4th line. So we had a national search, and the person that wound up being selected was Beth Dalton. That was a critical move. From that point to present, we're now in a position where there's a 5th person who's half-time. I was able to lobby for that position a year ago. Obed Frausto is the person who holds that position. I was also successful in realigning the Varan professorship so that it was fully within the Honors College. When I went back to look at the original documents that established the position, it seemed clear to me that this was intended to be a faculty position in honors. At the time, there were no faculty in honors, but now there were. It's a tenured position, so the tenure lies within another academic unit because I don't have tenure in the Honors College to offer, but I do have the line. So the Varan faculty member, who is Alex Kaufman, is now in honors. Thanks to the beneficence of the Ball Brothers Foundation, I now have 2 half-time honors faculty fellows, and those are fixed-term half-time appointments in the Honors College. Amongst other things, it's a way to continually energize the faculty and the student offerings too. So here's where we are. We had a faculty meeting last week. We've got a faculty that can get work done now. So I have faculty who are working on, I have 2 faculty who are working on a diversity plan for the college, and they're bringing in students to assist them, but the faculty are taking the ownership. We have faculty who have the infrastructure to successfully seek promotion, and they have. We have faculty who can take on significant service projects, like helping to lead the charge for the MIHA conference that we're hosting in 2 weeks. These are things that faculty do. I have faculty who can offer resistance and offer alternative perspectives when I propose an initiative. I need that sounding board. I need that resistance. That's how you garner quality, by vetting and by testing and by challenging. That's what makes for a successful unit. And as I look around the table today, what a privilege it is to have colleagues that are innovative, who are visionary, who are willing to take on challenges, who are willing to dream, who are willing to imagine that we can be a powerful and impactful element on campus, that we can invite national speakers to make an impact on this campus, like Teju Cole, like Linda Berry, and like others that we'll be bringing in the future. That I've got faculty who are positioned and equipped and enabled to make a difference in the community through the beneficence projects, to make a difference in the library through the Infinite Museum, to make a difference in the classroom. And I think the mix of core and affiliate is important. I don't want to lose my affiliates because they give us fresh voices. And frankly, they've invested years and years in us, just like I did through those first few years. And I definitely don't want to dismiss them because they're an important piece of the puzzle. But my core faculty are a critical piece of the puzzle too. And I need them. I need their sounding board. And I need their ideas. And so moving to having faculty empowered us to be able to keep moving. And frankly, that's one reason why it's one of the critical pieces for a well-developed college.
How many faculty have you hired?
I have hired Jackson Bartlett as a full-time contract. I hired Obed Frosto as a half-timer. I hired Beth Dalton. I hired Alex Kaufman. I hired Amy Livingstone. And selected the first 2 fellows. And I'm pleased to say I promoted my 3 senior faculty also.
How do you determine who to hire?
It's tricky because it's a non-tenure line position, aside from the Varan professorship. It's a non-tenure line position, so it's not for the person whose sole purpose is to climb the tenure ladder. It needs to be a person who will thrive in an interdisciplinary culture. It needs to be someone who values interactions with students. Someone who's willing to take a risk. Someone who's innovative. Someone who can provide us a different voice. Um, I think those qualities describe every single one of my hires.
So we have about 20 minutes remaining.
Okay.
And I'm going to transition into talking about your fundraising efforts for the Honors College. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. In the same way that we've been a best kept secret, we've not done a good job of growing our advancement and development. And I don't fault my predecessors there. There was plenty of work to be done. But we're at a point now where we've got to move beyond the very valuable and impactful large gifts and grow the base. The gifts of Edmund Virginia Ball Foundation, the very generous gifts of the George and Frances Ball Foundation, the Ball brothers, and several individuals, Steve Anderson, an anonymous donor in honor of Dean Meyer, some other significant gifts are very important, and they're already making a difference. Where I think our next steps are reaching to our graduates, because we have 60 years of graduates now, and we have people who have developed into leaders and impactful people, in part, I believe, because of what we offered at Ball State. And we hear the stories, and they are valuable stories. They're stories that can challenge our students to follow along. And the gifts of attention, the treasures of good memories are very important. But in this day and age, frankly, we need the financial resources. We can't expect that the Honors College will be supported because it's always been that way. We can't expect that the Whitingers will continue because it's always been that way. And frankly, some things that have always been that way shouldn't be. The folklore that honors colleges are for the privileged. The folklore that we're the place for the valedictorians and the upper middle class. For those who score really well on the standardized exams. We're missing a lot of people. And my goal is to not miss those people. And for some, it's going to take looking at them as people, not as numbers. And we're already changing the way that we look at our apps. But for some, it's providing that resource of making it possible for a first-generation college student to actually realize that potential. And that's where we need the gifts. That's where we need the resources. We must channel the treasures to make it possible for first-generation college students, for people of less means than you and I, to be able to take that risk. It's the right thing to do. And it's a critical thing to do because that's what our future generation needs. And to get there, I certainly need the important gifts from the foundations and the important gifts of my major donors. But I need the little gifts too. Because that $10 gift from a recent graduate, that $10 gift from someone who's on their first job, of paying it back, those small gifts from parents of graduates, and I'm getting them. Those are important. And they're important not just for now, but they're important for 20 years from now. Because if I do my job well, then those people will be empowered and they'll realize the potential of their gifts. So that 20 years from now, we'll still be on their radar. They will see the product of their investment and they'll want to invest more. And that's important. It's important to not look at tomorrow, but to look at 20 years from now, 40 years from now. I think about my mom. My mom had a potential, and it was realized through me. And she made the investment, and she made the sacrifice, and she dug holes and planted trees. She cleaned houses, picked berries, so that I could take a chance. And what we've got to do is be ready for that next generation, be able to take a chance too. So that's why philanthropy, that's why gratitude, that's why advancement is my job.
How is the Honors College developing to offer that chance to these students?
First steps are recognizing and acknowledging our alums and our friends. This fall we had what I believe was our first ever alumni reunion. We did it as part of the 100-year celebration. We had a small but happy crowd. But you know what? We also had a lot of regrets. And those were just as valuable because those were people who wished they could be there. I'm establishing a couple of advisory committees, one for alumni and a second for alumni who are involved in leadership of honors programs in colleges right now. I see the second one as being more advisory on best practices. I see the first as being a way to grow that communication both ways. News and Notes now goes out twice a year to our alumni and friends. That's an easy one. We're inviting alumni back to campus. We're doing it in bits and drabs, but we're doing it. So we have an alum who's coming to campus next month. We had a couple who were on campus last fall. You make something happen by starting. That's what we're doing. We're starting.
We have about 10 minutes remaining.
Mm-hmm.
So before I bring this interview to a close, I would like to ask you, was there anything related to your experience with the Honors College that we didn't cover that you would like to talk about?
Well, I'll share a story. My goal when I teach a class is to challenge the students. And it started to develop when I was teaching math classes. My style changes a little bit with every class I teach. But one thing has become a constant for me. I walk in the first day, and I hand out the syllabus. I do not read the syllabus. I read the disabled student development section of the syllabus because I have had no vision or low vision students in my class, so I feel like I should do that. So I read that paragraph. And then I look the students in the eye and I say, I will never lie to you for more than 2 days at a time. And I get a laugh because I want to laugh. And then I explain, because my goal is to not lead you down the yellow brick road. My goal is to let you taste the curb every once in a while, to discover what a brick wall feels like. This is important in math, because in math, sometimes you need to know when a process is wrong, and when you hit that conundrum, or you hit that point where I don't know what to do, something's wrong here. If we never practice those skills, then we're sort of like a squirrel. We don't know how to back up. And I want to have those kind of conversations in class. I also want the students to always be wary. I want them to always challenge. I want them to always question. Because number one, that keeps them engaged. But number two, it keeps me vulnerable. And I do actually lie every once in a while. There was one time a few years ago where I had pulled this reference. It was a journal article that was so buggy, it was just stinky bad. And it was a published article, but shall we say it was not in a top tier journal, all right? And it actually opened the door for another discussion. So that's why I wanted to use the article. So it's near the end of the hour, and I sort of unveil this article, and I've got it up on the screen, and I'm laying it out. I'm talking about the results of the article, and I'm doing it stone cold, no hint. And I'm just starting, and you got to remember, this is a juicy one. I want to get full impact out of this little article, and I've just started, maybe 5 minutes into it, and one of my journalism majors, sitting right here to my right, says, "Is this real?" I thought, no, wait a moment. I want to get more, value out of this article. So I did the only reasonable thing. I looked her in the eye. I said, "What's the problem? You see a problem here?" And she backed down. Now, I did see her later that day, and I whispered to her, "You should challenge me again tomorrow." And so I let her know that she really was in the right. And she did. And it was wonderful. But those are good skills to have. And I want to grow those skills in my students also. I want my students to know that it's okay to challenge. It's okay to question. In fact, it's critical. And it's critical to go after those wrong answers. It's critical to take the risk. Because sometimes that's where the beauty is. Sometimes that's where the magic is. By challenging the norm, by challenging the anticipated, by challenging the expected. And it happens in math. It happens in all disciplines. But sadly, it happens too rarely in a college class, because we stand up and we dispense information. Well, my goal is to not dispense information quite so well. I want to also provide the opportunities to grow in those ways too. And so that's a standard piece of my puzzle. And depending on the class, sometimes I get to practice it more often than others. This is especially effective in colloquia, because there you've already got typically a good conversation going. You already got a diverse set of perspectives flowing. And not only do I want the students to challenge me, I want them to challenge each other. And so I need to play along with that too. And I will. But that's a piece of my puzzle.
We are out of time. So on behalf of the Ball State Honors College Oral History Project, I would like to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us and share your story today.
Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you for investing your time in this project too.